Right. So basically what I plan to do is to cover some fundamentals of design thinking. Some of you may be aware of what it is and what kind of structure it incorporates. The thought here is just to share enough to pick your own curiosity, so that if you wish to pursue it further, you can take it, because it's like an ocean. And I don't think 1 hour is something we can really cover it in. Also, I don't intend to consciously, talk about design thinking and coaching and forcing the connection between both of them. What I want to invite you all is to look for those connections if they come for you, right? So as we are talking, and if you see that something is connecting and resonates with what happens in coaching, or any competency or structure or the way you interact with clients, feel free to kind of put it out on chat or raise hand and express that. One more thing I want to kind of invite you all to do is to look at design thinking not as a separate discipline, but think of it as something which can be integrated, in your daily life. See the connections. So look around you, the kind of product services you use, and see what comes up for you as we are talking about it. How those services and products are designed, what kind of experiences you get out of it, and see how you can integrate it with other things you do. Some of you are agile coaches, some of you are doing various HR related activities. Some of you are in business. So look at how you can integrate that. And lastly, it's also about, seeing it as a system. So the way I think of each of these discipline, and this kind of fascinates me in terms of seeing the overlap between various disciplines, and how, even though we may think that they are separate, they connect so much together. Right. If I have to give you an example of our human body, let's say we are taught in biology, the anatomy, but actually, if you think about it, there is so much of chemistry and physics involved in a body, right? So there's a lot of interconnectivity of disciplines. So look out for those things, right? So I'm going to share a PPT, but don't worry about it. If you wish to come up with anything at any moment, let's do that. Yeah. So this is a quote by Don Norman. It says everything is designed. So if you actually think about it, from the caveman, his club, to the modern AI-based products and services, everything has some kind of a design to it, right? And the beauty of this thing is that Don Norman actually came out with a book on designing somewhere in 80s. And he actually named that book The Psychology of Everyday Things. He didn't name it The Design of Everyday Things. He called it the psychology. That's the kind of belief he had about design, that designing is not something which is coming out from anywhere outside. It's a lot which is inside us, inside the customers, and that's how it's going to originate. And the other pioneer in field of design is, kind of favorite, Steve Jobs, who talked about it in a way which only he could, where he said that design is not just what it looks and feels like, but it's how it works. So if you look at the products which Apple came out with when Steve Jobs was, at the helm of affairs, they were functional, but they were also wonderfully designed. You would feel that pride when you had those. It gave you a sense of kind of a completion. So if you talk to people who use those products, they will not go for anything else, because that's the kind of connectedness which they feel with these products. So it's not just about how it looks, how it feels, how it works, but what kind of experience it gives to you. That's what we are talking about when we look at design as a whole, right? So see, design thinking is not a way of designing. If you ask me, the way I look at it, it's a way of thinking about design. That's the key difference which I take from it. So even before you start thinking of designing something, you are actually thinking about what to design for whom, and how do you want to go about the whole process of doing it, right? So that's where the definition of design thinking comes into play. So there are 5 or 6 key words which come into this definition. And I have not picked any standard definition of design thinking, because there is no standard definition. Every person who has worked with design has put a different spin to it. And, like IDEO says that it's basically an idea. Design thinking is just an idea, and how you take it forward and put it into practice is completely up to you. But what definitely it does talk about is that it's an approach, right? It's a mindset. How do you want to look at finding solutions? It's an approach to finding solutions. And the reason it says solutions, it's not solution. because we are looking at multiple possibilities. We're not looking at just one. There could be so many different variants of a solution to a particular problem or a question, right? Also, the approach is iterative. So we are not looking at doing something from one end to another and then coming up with something and saying that, yeah, this is what it is. We are saying that, okay, let's make it work. Let's do it. What we come up with, if it's relevant, if it satisfies the need, we work with it. Otherwise, we let it go and we work again. So it's an iterative approach. It's also non-linear. So while there are some kind of components or steps which are defined in design thinking, there's no hard and fast rule as to what should be followed, except for obviously understanding the requirement first. But other than that, you keep shifting and shuffling between the various components of the thinking itself. It's a creative and innovative process. Uh, what we mean by creative and innovative, I'll talk about it a little more, because these are terms which are quite confused at times when we talk about them, and they're used very lightly. And finally, it's a human-centered approach. This definition of human-centered, now we also include all living beings as part of this. But when this came out, we used to talk about how a product or service has to be designed for the people, as to how they are, not how you want them to be. So a lot of products, if you think about, which don't work, they are kind of forced upon us in a way that the designer or the product owner thinks that this is what is needed. But is that what is needed by the customer? And who is the customer? So in case of design thinking, we define a customer as different from consumer. So the customer is one who pays, consumer is one who uses, right? So that's a clear differentiation. There's a wonderful case study on Huggies, pull-up pants. And if any of you is interested, there's this case study. If you search for it, Beckman and Barry, they came out with this case study. So sometime in 80s, the two major diaper manufacturers were Kimberly-Clark and P&G, and they had almost 80% of market share. And all the diapers used to look same, because they were actually same, because the material was imported from Japan, the same kind of foam. They were manufactured in the same way. And the primary purpose they thought was just to keep the children, clean when they are out. But how do you get the differentiation? So they tried creating differentiation by gender-based, diapers, till Kimberly-Clark actually came out with a full-fledged project to find out what did the parents actually need for diapers. And that's when they came up with this, that they were very uncomfortable with a diaper which made that plastic noise, or those, Velcro tapes. And that's how the Huggies pull-up pants actually came out. So, understanding what the parents wanted, because the children were not really in a position to express what they wanted. And parents were looking at diapers as a way of, clothing, not just as a product separate than that. So what is it that a customer is looking for? How do you approach it from their angle? Not saying that this is the product which I want to launch, but finding out what is the product that customer wants, and then working backwards from it, right? So this also involves in terms of not only just understanding what they want, but what do they want to do with it. So there is this, 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor thing, the disaster which happened. One of the key things which they found out was that the danger switch was designed badly. So the people who were working there didn't know which switch to press when there was a danger. So such a simple thing, not really understanding the people who are working, how do they define it, or how do they look at using that particular thing. What is creative and innovative? So when we are talking about creative, we are looking at something which is beyond the usual, something which is not, which we have been doing traditionally or working with that. It's not also incremental. So we are looking at something which is, typically we use the term out of the box. But one way in which innovation has been defined by Peter Senge, and he comes out with a wonderful definition of it. He says that, innovation is only when it can be replicated reliably. When we talk about jugards, something who has come up with a way to work something, it's not an innovation, it's just an idea. Only when you make it work at a meaningful scale and at a cost which is practical, then only it becomes innovation. Now think about this. Peter Senge talks about this in his book, Fifth Discipline, which is actually about a learning organization. And he might as well be talking about design thinking or a product, right? So that's what I was talking about in terms of integration, how it works. So when you're looking at innovation, how do you integrate it and look at all the aspects? So one of the things which, when Don Norman used to talk about this, he used to say that how does my product flow from the manufacturing or even at that place where people who are manufacturing it, from them to the end user. So there's a courier company involved, there is a retailer or a distributor involved, there is someone who's going to open that package and give it to the user. Each of them needs to be integrated in this and said that how do I look at a product or a service which takes care of everything? How do I integrate it? It's a big ask, but that's what the kind of extent of design thinking is. That's where it takes to the extremes. It's a iterative and non-linear process, and this four terms are something which I love about design thinking. This is from a book by Temesh and Wrigley, and the title of the book is Think, Make, Break, and Repeat. So thinking is basically the process of learning from the customer. Making is what you create as a prototype or as a test part, and breaking is actually testing it and seeing whether it satisfies what you wanted to do with it. And you keep doing it again and again till you come up with a solution which is actually needed by the customer in a non-linear way. Yeah. So we were talking about finding solutions. And the key question here is solution for what? What is the problem exactly? For whom are we finding the solution? So when we talk about, like I said, about consumer and customer, are they the people who actually are going to use the product? Do we really know who is? So take an example of Byju's, what we use, right? The parent is the one who's paying for it. The child is the one who's using the product. So who is the solution for? Is it for the parent or is it for the child? Right? That's something which goes into the marketing aspect of it. When you create those personas for people, or when you create those customer journey maps to see who is the customer, for whom am I creating this solution? And finally, the solution has to be accessible, because you can't create a solution which people cannot use. It has to be viable, the cost part, and it has to be practical. So when you look at finding for whom we are looking at it, there is a process for it, wherein you go through a questionnaire, you talk to people, you ask them, you observe, and we'll come to that about it. Uh, there's a wonderful story by Ernesto Ciroli. If you go to YouTube, you'll find it. I think there's a TED talk by the name of Shut Up and Listen. And he has also written a book on his experience in Zambia, which is, I think, Rumblings in Zambia or something. So he talks about this experience of 1970s when he went as part of a Italian NGO to Zambia, and typical Western attitude, they were looking at those countries as someone who was not developed, or they were backward. And he says that we decided that we want to teach them agriculture, and so because agriculture was not such a big thing at that time. And he said that, okay, we'll teach you how to grow tomatoes and zucchini. And he says that, okay, the people were not interested. We tried to bring them in, and we even paid them to come and work on those fields, but they were not really keen. And they were like, okay, these guys don't know. And thank God for us that now we are able to teach them about this. And after some time, they had a wonderful crop of tomatoes, and he talks about how the size was big and a wonderful harvest they had. Overnight, a crowd of some 200 hippopotamus came and they ate away the whole crop. And they were like flabbergasted. Okay, what is this? And they said, the Zambians said, that's why we don't do agriculture. And they said, why didn't you tell us? So that you didn't ask. Right? So they didn't even know whether they needed agriculture or not. They just assumed who was the customer here, what was the solution, what was the problem. No ideas. If you are finding solutions without really understanding the problem, that's what happens. And he says in a funny way that at least we fed the hippos, towards the end. Okay, so this is where design thinking comes together in terms of what are we looking for finally. So there are three components to it. And you will find this will resonate with a lot of things we do in a day-to-day way. So one component is desirability. What are people looking for? What are customers looking for? What is it that they desire? At this point of time, we are not looking at it in terms of whether it's possible or not. We don't even look at, is the desire really practical? There's no question of that. It's about what is it that they desire. The second component is of feasibility. So can this be done in terms of the capability and technology we have? And finally, can this be made financially viable? Now, this is a typical definition which design thinking takes and says starts at desirability. Don't start at feasibility, don't start at viability, because when you start at, let's say, feasibility, what you're doing is you're starting with constraints. You're saying that this is what is possible. So, if this is all is possible, then can I do what you're desiring for? Or when you look at viability, you say that this is my capital or this is what I need to earn from it. So what do I do? So you start with certain restrictions or constraints. So that's why you start with desirability. And a forward-looking version of it is where you change the questions. So while you say, what do people desire? But when it comes to feasibility, you say, what resources are needed to make this possible? So if this is what a customer is desiring, can I make it possible? And for making it possible, what is needed in terms of capability, in terms of technology, resources, knowledge, whatever. Similarly, how can I make it financially viable? So is it, are we looking at the traditional models of business and financial viability, or can we look at a new way in which it can become viable? Right. So the sweet spot is basically where you get the solution of all three coming together. And a majority of part, the time is spent on knowing that desirability. When we come to the process of design thinking, you will see out of these steps, almost 60% of time is spent on desirability, in trying to understand the customer and knowing that. So this is a typical way of representing how a solution emerges from design thinking. And you will see this is what typically happens in a coaching session, right? If you think about it, we have a research part in thinking where we are trying to understand what exactly the challenge is. There's so much of uncertainty. There are a lot of patterns which emerge. Then as we go ahead, there are some insights which come out. Based on those insights, we come up with, a theory or a hypothesis or a prototype, and we test it. And then finally, there is a clarity which emerges. This so, kind of parallel to how it works in what we have when we are talking to a client or when we are addressing a problem in general. And if you look at the broad philosophy of design thinking, this is what it is. Or the whole process can be summarized into these two: diverge and converge. So divergence is about creating options. That's where we start. If you think of a consulting approach, typically when we talk about our approach where an option is given, where we say, okay, these are the possible choices, what do you want to pick? That's a converging process where you're trying to bring it down in terms of choices and you want a decision to come out. But when you combine a divergence and a convergence process, what you're doing is expanding it, saying, okay, this is what is desirable. What are the possibilities? What are the options? Based on all those possibilities and exploration, then we try and narrow it down further and say that, okay, this is the choice which is coming out, and how do we proceed with those choices? So this process is not just one time, it keeps on happening. Think of a typical coaching session, CC 3.1. What are we doing actually? When a customer is saying something, we are looking at that goal behind the goal. We are exploring, expanding, diverging, and then coming back to 3.1 and saying, okay, this is a goal where the customer is saying that. So there's so much of repetition of this whole process happening in a session or even otherwise. Okay, so these are the 5 steps. This is a model which is propagated by Stanford Design School and which is one of the most commonly used model. There are so many models, at least 7 to 8 models which are in use. And depending on what kind of challenge or problem we are facing or we are trying to solve, different models can be used. But this is a model which is simple, and therefore I picked it up to just give a sense of what exactly we are trying to do in design thinking. So these are the 5 steps, starting with empathizing. When we empathize, we are looking at understanding what the customer wants. So the understanding part is what happens in empathizing. How do we understand? We'll come to that a little later. But once you empathize, you first define the problem. And defining the problem is something which is not done once. You keep iterating it, you define, you go back to client, is this what you want? And you keep doing it. Finally, when the definition has been achieved, That's when we ideate and say, this is what is the problem statement for me, and what are the ideas I can generate from this. The process of each of this involves customer right from the beginning. So it's not something which is designed, in a boardroom or in a conference hall, and then it is taken to customer right from the stage when you involve the customers in decision groups or in kind of conducting surveys or mapping their journey, understanding how they interact with dummy products, all those kind of things. Once you have the idea and there are multiple ideas, you look at creating prototypes, various kind of prototypes, right from very low definition models, working models, high definition, and actual usable products which can be put out where customers can interact with it. And then you come back, refine the prototypes, and then you test it in live market and take it to few customers and say, how is it working for them? Finally, when it is ready, if it's not, then you let it go. One of the key things of design thinking is that ability or that need to let go, because if it says fail fast, if you're not willing to fail fast and let things go, you're not coming at with multiple solutions or coming up with a optimum solution which is workable. So there's no attachment to the product. There's only attachment to what the customer wants and finally being able to deliver it. So if you look at this process, where do we start? So these are the 2 points which kind of gave me goosebumps when I read them, and these are picked up exactly from this book, The Design of Everyday Things. And Don Norman says design starts with good understanding of people, of who they are, and he says the needs that the design is intended to meet. So what? So when we are talking about who and what, both together, right at the first stage, when we empathize, this is what we start with. And how do we understand people? He says that people themselves are unaware. They don't know what their needs are. They think that this is their need. And so he talks about thin and thick desires, right? Thin and thick needs. Thin needs are something which we acquire. So we see people using something and we feel this is our need. While thick needs are something which are deep down, which are fundamental, which is something which has come out of us. It's not something which, because others are using, I am using it, or I need to use it. Because someone has bought a new phone, I need a new phone. So, thick and thin desires and needs, that's where the approach is to figure out what are the true needs. How do you elicit that? And he says customers are even unaware of the difficulties they are encountering. So think about a product or a service like Swiggy. Before Swiggy came, I think many of us would have thought if there was something where we could order some food, right? Or something like, ordering goods to be moved without really going out and looking for a truck or a tempo. These kind of services or these needs were existing, but he didn't think about them unless someone came and said, okay, this is a challenge which people are facing. Can I create something for it? This is a need from a customer. Can I create a product? So do we express what we are really unaware of? Unless it's brought out, we don't. That's where the whole process of empathy comes, wherein the focus is on looking at every aspect of customers. Questions are defined or designed on how does a customer think about a particular solution or a problem. So if they are using a particular product, what are they thinking when they are using it? Is it easy for them to use? What is it that which goes through their mind? Do they find it very complicated? Do they need to check the manuals to see it? What do they see and hear when they're using a product? What kind of sounds are associated? What are kind of visuals are associated with a product? What do they feel about the product? The touch part of it, the using it, the knobs, the buttons, all kind of things. And what do they do with it? So is it a way in which, one of the things which people say in design thinking, you design a product for the worst user, not for the best user. Because people will use it the way they have been using things, and they're not going to use it the way you want them to use, right? While you will create manuals and you will do things, but if you design for the ideal situation, then you are putting up the product for a failure, because there are people who will use it in all possible ways. Think of Nokia phones, the ones which came, the brick models. They are designed for people for rough use. People could drop them because they were new at that time. People didn't know how to hold them also at times. So just the thought of how do you design a product for a person who's going to use it in the worst possible way? And what does it lead to? This empathy mapping finally leads to what does the gain come out of it? What are the pain areas for the customer when they are using it? How do they want to connect both of these and come to an optimum solution? So we are not looking at something which is utopian that will satisfy everything possible. But what is the extent possible to which you can actually take care of the needs of the customer in this way? So this is where the learning happens. So a user is there. In this case, when we are talking about empathy map, we are using these questions or these scenarios to define the problem. So we have the user identified. We have the need identified to some extent. There is a problem statement. But when you actually observe the customer, when you actually see how they are using it, when you see that a lot of times customers say they use a product in a particular way, but they use it in a different way. So when you observe that, when you see the pattern, that's when the insight comes. It's like that awareness or realization which comes from a user and a problem statement. Very similar to that. That's when you define it. There's a wonderful case study of GE. I just took this graphic from their page. This is how GE came up with designing MRI machines for children. And the biggest challenge they used to face was when children used to come for these MRIs, especially kids with cancer. There was a lot of panic because the machines were quite intimidating, especially when it slides in and it's a very narrow tunnel-like thing. So they said, okay, what is the challenge? Children want to have fun. That's the need they have. So what do we do? Can we create an experience wherein the kids participate in it and they feel that, it's not something which is intimidating, but it's an adventure. So they designed these MRI rooms and machines and the hall and the approach and everything in different themes. So there was one pirate theme, there was a spaceship, there was a cartoon related thing. So the children would come, they would be signed up, they would be given some kind of a costume, even the parents would be given. Whole thing was thought of as an adventure. How did this insight come? They actually visited kindergartens and they found out what is it that a child relates mostly to. One of the things which came out was that children felt uncomfortable in hospital. And the response which the child gave was that this doesn't smell like my mom's kitchen. That's such an insight which came out. It said that, okay, what is it that a child is associating? And comfort comes from that smell, which is so, unique, that mom's kitchen or that touch of the mom. That's how they came up with this solution. So where is the solution going to come from? You don't know unless you really observe, you become aware of, and you see it, right? So this is kind of a summary which I have tried to create. Uh, you know, what design thinking and coaching I feel has in common is some kind of a human-centric approach. Primarily, we are looking at a customer as a centerpiece. It's nothing else. There's no need or there's no agenda for the coach or even in design thinking, but the person in front. And we are focusing on the whole, the integrated part, which we were talking about. How do we integrate the solution to make it comfortable, make it possible for the person as a whole? It's a forward-looking approach. So at no point in design thinking, we are looking at the back and saying that, okay, how did you use it earlier and how do you want to use it? We're saying that this is where we are. This is the challenge. How do we design a product or a service so that you can use it now and in future? How does it solve problems for you now and in future? It's a forward-looking approach. It's aspirational because we are starting with that point of desirability. So we're creating that aspiration. We're not saying that this is possible. Do you want it or not? We're saying, what do you want? And let's see if we can create it for you, right? So it's aspirational, iterative, and innovative. Innovative because we want to make it work. It's not just a model which will stay in some kind of lab. It's something which looks at possibilities, not just in an aspirational way, but when we say possibilities, when we talk of, if you have experienced the 6 thinking hats, one of the hats is only about creating possibilities. It says, it doesn't look at what is workable, what is not workable. What is possible? Let's put all of it down. without being critical of it, without finding faults about it. We'll see later when the stage comes whether it's workable or not. But as of now, let's put everything in the basket and see what do we have. And the key appreciation of design or the customer comes by asking, by watching, and by listening. In the Siroli episode of listening, asking the right question and then listening. What do you get out of watching? If you think of the experience we have as coaches, when we talk about listening completely, we are looking at not the words, but the customer, the body language, the breathing, the expressions, how they are moving around. There's so much of watching, which is a critical part of understanding a customer. There was once I was talking to someone from a car store, and he was saying that they come to know the moment a customer walks in, they are able to see whether this customer wants to buy or he's just come to see. They're so tuned that they're able to see that this customer is just a casual walker. He just wants to look around, or someone else who is really looking at buying and exploring. How do you develop that? By continuously watching, by continuously asking, listening. And finally, the insights is what leads to solutions. That awareness, that realization, that insight is where the critical point which leads to finding a solution, an answer, which leads to further action comes up. That's how I see this coming together. And I leave the floor open because this is what I wanted to talk about. There's a lot more to talk, but I don't want to get into more of sharing. So let's see what kind of thoughts come in. Any questions or comments or anything which connects or doesn't connect with you?
Just an observation. This is PK here.
Sure, PK.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, it's interesting the way you have tried to connect design thinking and coaching. It's quite novel and interesting to know that there are so much in common, so many things in common. And one of the things that really piqued my interest was that coaching needs to be addressing a particular segment, or coaching needs to be like design thinking. Who is the customer? Who is the consumer? Who needs to be really answered for all of us to be in business of coaching. Coaching may be theoretically universal, but if we need to practice it as a business of coaching, that is one parallel that was striking for me.
Yeah, very well said, Peter. That niche which I think you keep talking about is something so important to really know which segment you're addressing. Yeah. Feel free to share whatever. Yeah.
Any question, comment, especially from techies here. Anyone here practicing anything the realm? Vinod, Dinesh, Janaki, others. So many I can say Madhu, Omar, good to see.
Yeah. So I think this is sorry. Please go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to be a little bit controversial, because when training, I'm a design thinker, and now I'm learning to be a coach. I'm still on the initial phases. Some of you already know. So I have maybe some of my conceptions about coaching are wrong, and I apologize for that. But for me, I see that, it's just such a different approach, because when I am a design thinker, I fall in love with the problem. Whereas what I've been taught as a coach is like, hey, let's leave the past behind. Let's leave the problem behind. Just look for a solution. Look forward, right? In design thinking, you never ask people what the solution is. I mean, as Steve Jobs, you mentioned Steve Jobs, but he never said, I will never ask people what they want. Or Henry Ford, he said, if I asked people what they wanted, I would have never built a car, would have built a chariot, like a faster chariot. Same thing said Steve Jobs about the iPod. So you ask them actually about what they do, like, tell me, how is a typical day for you, in the frame of a problem, a business problem, which is what Reka always tells us, that's nosy curiosity. That's not coaching curiosity. So I mean, for me, they're just so different that I don't see the connection. I mean, coaching is great, and I see the value of coaching in the business world, but for design thinking, the techniques I've used and the approach I use is so different that I'm having a hard time seeing
No,
called.
that's wonderful thought, Omar. And in fact, when you talked about Henry Ford, he famously said that you can buy any color as long as it's black. He didn't give any options, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. That's
time.
another
Yeah.
thing attributed
Yeah.
to him. We don't know if he really said that.
Yeah, that's also true. Google has a lot of things which we don't really know about. But the point, what you said is right to a large extent, that we come out with products, but a lot is being spent in terms of understanding the client through market research. It may not necessarily be called design thinking, right? There's a lot we do in terms of understanding the client before we come out with a product. Now you can name it anything. You can raise those questionnaires, you can call those focus groups, or you can reach out to people and give them samples and do. What are you exactly doing? You're trying to understand the customer, right? What do they want? That's the whole thing. So as I said, there need not be a fixed process for design thinking, and you don't even need to call it design thinking for really being able to understand the customer. The crux is that you want to understand the customer so that when you come out with a product, it works for them. That's my thought.
Yeah, but I mean, when I work as a design thinker, I ask so many things of the customer. I observe so many things. Whereas when I'm learning how to coach, it's like they tell me our dear instructors, tell me that's nosy curiosity. That's not really help you. I mean, sometimes you don't even need to know those details about the person, because what you want is what does the person want, and the things that in design thinking we know that people generally they don't know what they want. They know what can be a pain for them, but they don't really know the solution. That's your job. And also, we often need to come up with a potential solution and kind of validate that solution. It's the double diamond figure. Whereas in coaching, when I actually come up with a solution, because sometimes you empathize with someone because you kind of been there, there's this transference, it's like, okay, I've been there in the situation. It's so hard to resist that temptation to lead them. Yeah, we ask questions, but we're kind of leading them towards a solution that it's so obvious for us that person should acquire. So for me, that's why I said that the mindset for design thinking and for coaching are so different. And I'm having a hard time bringing them together.
No, absolutely wonderful. Yeah, sure. And it's not that they're absolutely parallel end to end, but there are parts, I think, which overlap quite well, and where we can learn from each other. So we can take what comes in coaching into design, and we can take from design into coaching. So I think it's a integration of approaches wherever it works, not necessarily a complete overlap.
Okay, let's hear it from others.
Sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
There was a very good share exchange. I had just one observation. Well, I think two takeaways from me. One was about somewhere agreeing with Omar to some extent that you can't use coaching, the formula, or kind of the framework of coaching entirely for design thinking. But I think a lot of the coaching competencies that we have are perfect skill sets for design thinking conversations. So the quality of the questions, the open questions, the noticing what we notice, the unspoken words, all of those things, I think those skills are absolutely essential for design thinking conversations. So that's one takeaway from me. The other takeaway, I think this is excellent insights for us as coaches on when we design our products for our customers, because we are also we are also solution providers in a different way. You're looking at what kind of solution your niche needs. How much is it? A group coaching program? Is it a team coaching program? Whatever. Somewhere the design thinking principles, I think, fall right there. And if we can become better at it, we probably will get better at servicing our clients and making more money, I'm sure, as a result.
Yeah,
that was my
that's a
takeaway.
great point. Yeah, Bhavani. In fact, as PK said, knowing the niche, who's the customer you're servicing starts there, and then you design something for them. Right from the chemistry, how do you design your chemistry session?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Mani. So a couple of, just one thing I'd like to differ from what Omar just mentioned is a lot of times when we are working with the product managers or clients, a lot of times they don't know what they really want. They don't know what they're really looking for. It's just all on paper, just all hypothesized. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of kind of failures, a lot of re-engineering before they end up finding out, okay, this is what I want, right? So we always focus on saying, how can we reduce that? How can you reduce those waste? How do you get those lean principles in practice, right? that is when we say, for example, in a product, we're trying to sell the experience, not actually the product, right?
Yeah.
Now, so when you have to, get that experience, what are that experience that they really want to create in those, or make the customers feel? That's what I feel, in coaching, it kinds of probes and get into those deep space, or maybe something saying that, okay, you're not ready yet. You still need to explore it. You may still want to do some sampling data. Maybe your sampling data is still not right for whatever statistics or research that you've done so far. Maybe your customer segment is not wide enough for what you're trying to build a product, right? So what I see is coaching is something that you build a great engine, but if you don't have a great engine oil, which makes it flow easily, the engine is going to fail anyhow, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I see a coaching as more like an oil to a great engine. And that's how that's where you want to, as we say in coaching, we want to get to that aha moment, right? So the same, how do you make these product managers or people are building products to get to the aha moment, saying that, oh, this is the right product, right? This is what I really want. This is the experience I really want the customers to get, right? To get there, coaching is one such kind of a process of how do you going to get there? How are you going to get into the deep, deep space of people? And one is whether to decide whether to say that, are you building the right thing? Are you not building the right thing? Or you still need to wait or whatever, right? So that's how I view, design thinking and coaching together.
And the point which you made, Vinod, about you don't want to do it multiple times, you want to avoid that, that's where the cost of failure comes in. So when we talk about cost of failure, it's very low in the initial phase. Once you have made a product, the cost of failure is high. That's where you don't want to let it go, right? If you have designed something like typical software approach, which we used to talk about earlier, the waterfall approach, people will come up with a software and say, how do we make it work now? Now we are saying, okay, we have made some of it, does it work? Can we do something else about it? I think that's where the cost of failure is much lower in the initial phase. So,
yeah. Thanks, Subramani, for bringing a very novel topic, as PK said it. I've been going through the trainings of design thinking as well as coaching, but you married up to give a different perspective. My key takeaway is, again, I'm going back to the basic broad philosophy, right? Diverge. So creating an options now, how to look the design thinking from a coaching perspective, keep exploring about it, and then take a converging point, make an choices towards it. So that's my key takeaway. One question I have is where going back to the Stanford's design school process, right? Empathize design. To an extent, I could relate to the coaching aspect of it. Can you please share about the ideate and prototype and test? Those stages, how could we relate to coaching aspect? So
yeah, so see, empathizing is basically understanding the customer, and defining is the defining of problem. So when we are looking at understanding what the customer is looking for, so if you just want to connect it to coaching, what is the customer looking for from the session? That's what we are trying to define. And in that process, we are also trying to understand who the customer is, right? Who the person is and what is this challenge. That's where the ideating part comes, the defining part comes in. And then it takes further in terms of understanding, okay, what are the possibilities for the client, from where, what they are talking about. So see, as I said, it's not that we can connect it component by component and say, this is this in coaching. So I also don't believe in that. But the thing is that there is a broader philosophy which says that we understand the customer, we understand the challenge which they are facing, what is it that they want to achieve, and then we explore it, and we do ideation, and then we define the challenge, and then we come back. At times we go back and forth in coaching, right? We've gone somewhere and we come back, and then we take from there and move ahead again. So I think it's that kind of. So what really appeals to me in this is that iterative process, because even coaching is not linear. Right? When we are going through it, there is a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of touching here and there, which is happening. So I think that way, if you look at it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Mani, I think thank you for choosing this topic. Yeah, I mean, I'm quite interested about this design thinking, as you know, and I still believe, I think there is a close connection with coaching and as well as, with design thinking. And I'm hearing some feedbacks about, the comparison, but in my point of view, the coaching is everywhere, right? I think even when I'm getting into any meeting, I mean, after I became a coach, I see a huge difference. Whenever I'm getting into any meeting, I consider it as a coaching session. It need not to be like, I always look for what is the goal, are we moving ahead? In a way, the point I'm making is, the coaching is everywhere. I mean, it's also in the design thinking, maybe some process steps, maybe more inclined. Yeah. Just want to add that line, but thank you for sharing, Mani.
Thanks.
Murli?
Yeah. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Murli.
Yeah. So couple of ways, Mani, thanks for bringing this for a discussion. Couple of ways where I was able to visualize the concept of design thinking and coaching, where I found the mindset and principles where it could be interlinked. One is in many scenarios, we actually use this concept of visualization, right? We take the client to a desired state, we take them to a future state where they aspire to be, and then we have a good conversation. I always felt that similar analogy happens that when we do design thinking principles in a corporate level, that is one area where I felt visualization actually helped. And trusting that most of us are in the Regal cohort, we actually use a very powerful tool, Regal at 60, right? In a way, it actually helps us to design the goals, and it actually helps us think through in different ways of how do we design our life, design our goals, work towards that. We take few ideas, we try few things based on the good written goals, and then we also try to have that reflection of does that work. Sometimes we amend our goals as we move forward. I felt in a lot of ways the way Regal at 60 goal that we do for some of the clients, that also actually is a way of looking at design thinking principles. So just reflecting both ways where I found a overlap or complementing design thinking and coaching mindset, just for the reference of the group. Thanks, Mani, for bringing this.
Shiva?
Hi, Mani. Thank you very much for this session. I attended a similar session very recently, and probably a lot of those on this design thinking has gone into me. I completely resonate how beautifully you have linked the coaching principles to this design thinking. And probably one important thing I thought that we could all take away from this session is the mindset that is required for design thinking. There is almost what do you call it? There are a lot of parallels between coaching and the design thinking. Like example, the mindset required for design thinking, we need to be having a human-centered approach. We need to be mindful of the process, and we need to create a culture of prototyping, and we need to show, don't tell, and there should be always bias towards action, and there is a radical collaboration. So some of these elements definitely what do you call it? Strike very well with the coaching principles. So I am able to correlate these things, and thank you very much for this session.
Thanks, Shiva.
Thanks, everyone. So, Mani, any closing remarks based on anything that any magical slide that you?
No, I don't have any magical slide. There are a lot of slides, but nothing magic.
Any closing remarks?
Yeah. So I just want to share that take it what appeals to you. There is no so like design thinking is not a solution for everything, right? That's something which we are taught in the very first session when I approached or when I was doing this course. Was taught that it's not a cure-all, right? It can work in some places, it doesn't work, but where it works is where the problem is typically undefined. Because that's where the scope for exploration, and that's the point which resonates with me for coaching. Because where you have a lot of that squiggle approach, where you have a lot of confusion, where the clarity is not there, that's where the potential for designing something is highest using this approach. And that's where the potential for coaching is highest, because if something is very mundane, something is very clear, the solutions are also clear. But where it's not defined, where it's not clear, that's where you use this to achieve those potentials. So that's what I have to say.
Thanks, Mani. Yeah. So, again, we don't have an agenda to force fit any concept into coaching and vice versa. But, we have to be thinking those, like, from a common man perspective, what Steve Jobs did, So we have to look at innovative solutions. I might have shared with many of you here, especially recent batches, that I work with an aggregator who gives me just 3 sessions. And in 3 sessions, the client asked me that, can you actually achieve all the goals in 3 sessions? But then we are constrained by that. So, the templates are shifting. So we need to be creative, innovative in a way that is, client-centric also. So we intend to, bring in other concepts like this, especially for some of us who are not open, we're not aware of these concepts. Like design thinking is Greek for me. So for me, it's a good starting point, and I was always curious about it. Yeah, thanks, Mani, for this. At a short notice, you agreed to come in and share this with us. Thanks, everyone who took time, especially when India is playing a cricket match in South Africa. Yeah, especially those who are joining from overseas, Omar, Madhu, and others. Prioritizing this. We need to continue doing that. Yeah, thank you. If no other questions,
thanks everyone for the various perspectives. That really helps. Yeah,
sure. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much, Subhash and Mani, for this session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.